call came on a Tuesday morning in late November, just as the first real snow of the season was starting to stick to the driveway. I remember because I'd been standing at the kitchen window with my coffee, watching it fall, thinking about how Raymond would have loved this kind of morning. He always said the first snowfall of the year was the only time Canada looked the way God intended. That was my best friend. 63 years of knowing someone, and he'd been gone for 11 weeks. I almost didn't pick up. The number wasn't in my contacts, and at my age, you learn fast that unknown numbers are either scammers or bad news. But something made me answer. Maybe I was just lonely enough that even a telemarketer felt like company. Is this Mr. Gord? Sorry, is this the gentleman who was listed as Raymond Kocher's emergency contact? A woman's voice. Professional. Careful. I told her yes. I set my coffee down. My name is Joanne Prescott. I'm a solicitor with Prescott and Aldridge in Barrie. I was Raymond's lawyer for the last several years. He left specific instructions in his estate that I contact you at this point, 11 weeks after his passing. He was very precise about the timing. I didn't say anything for a moment. Outside, the snow kept falling. He left something for you, she said. Not in the will itself, a separate matter. He was very clear that it should only reach you now, not before. He said you'd understand why eventually. I drove to Barrie the next morning, 2.5 hours from my place outside Sudbury, but I would have driven to Halifax if I had to. Raymond and I had been friends since grade 7 at St. Jude's. We'd gone to Laurentian together, stood at each other's weddings, been in the delivery room when each other's kids were born. Well, outside the delivery room, but close enough. When his wife passed from the cancer 11 years ago, I was the one who drove him home from the hospital. When my wife and I hit the rough patch in our 50s, he was the one who sat with me on his back porch until 2 in the morning while I figured out what I actually wanted. He died of a heart attack in August. Sitting in his garden in the evening, his neighbor found him the next morning. Quick, they said, peaceful, the kind of death people say they want, but it still felt like the ground had shifted under everything I knew. Joanne Prescott was a small woman in her mid-40s with reading glasses on the chain and an office that smelled like old paper and pine cleaner. She shook my hand firmly and got straight to it. She slid a padded envelope across the desk. He brought this in himself about 8 months ago, she said, around the time he was first diagnosed with the arrhythmia. He knew it might be serious. He told me, and I'm quoting him now because he wrote it down, "Do not give this to my friend until the 11th week. Not the 10th, not the 12th, the 11th. He'll need that much time to settle, and she'll need that much time to show her hand." I looked at the envelope. My name was on it in Raymond's handwriting. Just my first name. Gord. Like he was passing me a note in class. She? I said. Joanne nodded. His words, not mine. I didn't open it there. I don't know why. I drove to a Tim Hortons on the edge of town, got a large double-double, sat in the parking lot with the heat running, and I opened it. Inside was a USB drive, orange. The cheap kind you get at a drugstore, and a folded piece of paper in Raymond's handwriting that said, "Watch this alone, not at home. Go somewhere you won't be interrupted. Love, Ray." I sat in that parking lot for a long time. Then I drove to a motel on the highway, paid cash for a room, plugged the USB into my laptop, and I watched my dead best friend talk to me for 47 minutes. He'd set up a camera on a tripod in his living room. He was sitting in the blue armchair, the one he always sat in, with his reading lamp on beside him. He looked tired. He'd lost some weight by then, but his eyes were clear and he was smiling a little, the way he always smiled when he was about to say something he knew was going to land hard. "Gord," he said, "if you're watching this, I'm gone, and you've had almost 3 months to be sad about it. I figure that's enough time for both of us. Now I need you to listen to me." He leaned forward. "Your wife is not who you think she is." I hit pause. I stared at the screen. I pressed play again. "I know that's a hell of a thing to say to a man, and I know you're probably already angry with me, but I've been sitting on this for almost 2 years, And I didn't tell you while I was alive because I was afraid of what it would do to you. And I was afraid of what you'd do. I need you to just listen first. All the way through. Don't go home. Don't call her. Just listen. Raymond reached over and picked up a glass of water. His hand shook slightly. I need to go back about 18 months. You remember when you asked me to look into those investment account statements? The ones that didn't quite add up? You said Diane told you it was a rebalancing thing. The advisor had restructured everything, and you just didn't understand it. You asked me to take a look, because I used to work in insurance and I know how to read a financial statement. I remembered I'd handed him a folder of papers over dinner at his kitchen table. I trusted Raymond with things like that. He'd spent 30 years as an actuary for a firm in Toronto before he retired. Numbers were his language. I looked at them, he said, and Gord, I'm sorry, but there's no polite way to put this. Money has been leaving your accounts for at least 2 years, not in large amounts at once, nothing that would trigger an automatic flag, small transfers, irregular timing, always just under the threshold that would require additional verification. But I tracked it over 14 months of statements, and the total, as of the time I'm recording this, is somewhere close to $240,000. My hands went cold. I tried to find where it was going. I have a contact at a wealth management firm in Toronto, someone I worked with for years, and I asked him, hypothetically, to tell me what a pattern like this would look like from his end. He said it looked like someone building a separate financial life, slow, careful, patient, not panic. Planning. Raymond paused. He looked directly at the camera. About 4 months before I'm recording this, a man named, I'll let you read the documents I've attached on this drive. A man started renting a condo in Oakville. Delise lists his girlfriend as a co-signer. The girlfriend's name on those documents is not her real name, but the address she gave, the phone number she listed, the emergency contact, it all links back to Diane. I pressed pause again. I was sitting on the edge of the motel bed with my laptop on my knees, and I was 64 years old, and I felt like I was 20 years old, and the world had just tipped sideways. I pressed play. There's more, Raymond said, and he said it gently, the way you'd say it to someone who's already been hurt, and you're about to hurt them again. I had her followed, Gord. I'm sorry, I know that sounds extreme, but I needed to know what we were dealing with. I hired someone. I'll give you his information. He's licensed. He operates out of Hamilton, and over 6 weeks he documented 11 meetings between Diane and this man, 3 at his condo, the rest at various restaurants and hotels. I have photographs. They're on the drive. I want you to be prepared before you open that folder. He stopped. He took another sip of water. I need to tell you why I waited. Why I didn't come to you with this while I was still around to help you through it. He looked down at his hands. Because I was dying, Gord. I found out about the arrhythmia, and then I found out it was worse than they initially thought. And I made a calculation. The kind of calculation I've made my whole professional life. I calculated the risk of telling you and having you confront her immediately versus the risk of waiting. If you confront her now, she has time to cover her tracks. She has time to move more money, establish better documentation, make the story look different from her end. Divorce lawyers are expensive. Evidence disappears. I've seen it happen. He looked back at the camera. But if she doesn't know, you know. If she thinks she has all the time in the world, she'll keep doing what she's doing. And the longer she does it, the clearer the picture gets. I set up a digital archive. Everything is time-stamped. Everything has a chain of custody. My contact at the wealth management firm has a sworn statement. The investigator's documentation is notarized. Gord, by the time you watch this, you'll have a case that a good family lawyer can use to protect you. I wanted to give you the best possible foundation before I handed this over. He almost smiled. Also, I'm honest enough to admit I didn't want to watch you go through it. That's selfish. I'm sorry for that part. I sat in that motel room for a long time after the video ended. The snow had stopped. The parking lot outside was quiet and white. I opened the folders on the USB drive one by one. The financial records, the investigator's report, the photographs, a copy of the condo lease with her signature on it, the name she'd used, the address she'd given. There was a last document, A note from Raymond, typed this time, that said, "The lawyer who made this for me can walk you through everything. Joanne knows the situation. She's good. Trust her. And Gord, don't let anyone take what you built. You built it. It's yours. R." I called Joanne Prescott from the parking lot. "I was expecting your call today," she said. "You knew what was on there." Raymond shared the broad outlines with me. "Enough that I could advise you properly on next steps. I want you to come back in if you're still in town. I've already drafted a preliminary letter. We have options." I drove back to Barrie. I sat with Joanne for 2 hours. She explained what we had, what it meant, and what I needed to do next. She gave me the name of a family law lawyer, a woman in Toronto who apparently handled cases like this regularly, which somehow made me feel both better and worse. "I have one question," I said before I left. "Raymond was very specific about 11 weeks. Why 11? Joanne picked up a folder, looked at something, set it down. "He said 10 weeks wasn't enough time for a pattern to establish legally. He said 12 was too long. The longer you don't know, the more exposure you have. He'd worked it out actuarially." She paused. He was an actuary to the end. I drove home. The drive back was longer than the drive there. The way drives always are when you're going somewhere you're not sure you want to arrive. She was in the kitchen when I got back, making dinner, something with chicken, and it smelled good, and the kitchen was warm, and for just a second, just 1 second, I almost let myself believe in the life I thought I had. "How was Barrie?" she asked, not looking up. "Quiet," I said. "The drive was long. Are you hungry?" "I'll eat later," I said. "I'm going to go lie down." I lay on the bed in the dark for a long time. I thought about Raymond. I thought about 38 years of marriage. I thought about the money, the condo in Oakville, the photographs in the folders. I thought about my kids and how this was going to land on them. And then I got up, went to my desk, and I called the lawyer in Toronto that Joanne had recommended. Her name was Anita Mehta. She picked up on the second ring, which told me Joanne had given her a heads up. She was calm and precise, and she didn't offer me any false comfort, which I respected. "The documentation your friend assembled is exceptionally strong," she said. "I've handled a lot of these cases. This level of preparation is unusual. He clearly cared about you very much." I had to stop for a moment when she said that. "What do I do in the meantime?" I asked. "I have to go home and look at her every day, until this is ready." "That's exactly what you do," Anita said. "You go home, you behave normally, you do not confront her, you do not adjust any accounts, you do not make any sudden financial moves. You live your life, and you let us do our work. Can you do that?" I told her I could. I wasn't sure if it was true, but I told her I could. It took 6 weeks. 6 weeks of dinner and television, and the ordinary rhythms of a life I was already quietly dismantling from the inside. I got good at it faster than I expected to. There were moments, sitting across from her at breakfast, watching her scroll through her phone, where I'd feel something cold move through me. Not anger yet. Something quieter than anger, the particular grief of understanding that the person in front of you has been a stranger for longer than you realized. She didn't notice anything different about me. That told me something too. Anita moved quickly and quietly. The application was filed in the Ontario Superior Court of Justice. The financial documentation Raymond had assembled, combined with 3 additional months of bank records that Anita subpoenaed, showed a total diversion of just over $310,000. Her lawyer, when he finally got involved, made noise about some of it being legitimate spending. Anita took that apart methodically, document by document. There was also the question of the condo in Oakville. The man whose name was on that lease, I won't say his name because this is not a story about him, had apparently not known she was married. Or so he claimed. I don't know if I believe that, but it's also not my concern. Diane moved out in February into a rental in Newmarket. She took what was agreed upon and not a dollar more. Her lawyer had wanted to contest several things. Anita's response to each of those contestations was apparently sufficient that they stopped making them. My daughter came up from Guelph when she found out. She sat with me at the kitchen table and held my hands and cried, and I ended up comforting her, which is somehow always the way these things go. My son called from Vancouver. He was angrier than I was, which also seems to be how these things go. I am 64 years old, and I live alone now in a house in northern Ontario. The property taxes on this place are something, I'll tell you that much, but it's mine. All of it is mine, documented and clear. And in the spring, I'm going to get the back deck properly fixed because I've been putting it off for 3 years, and Raymond always said I was going to fall through one of those boards. He was right about most things. I went to see him in April. The cemetery is about 20 minutes out of town. A small Catholic place with old trees and a view across a field. His stone was up by then. I stood there for a while. I didn't say anything for the first few minutes because I didn't know where to start. Eventually I said, "You know, you could have just told me. I would have handled it." And then I said, "No, I wouldn't have. You were right. You were always right about the things that mattered." I put my hand on the top of the stone for a moment. Cold granite. First warm day of the spring, and the ground still cold underneath. "I'm okay," I told him. "That's what I came to say. I'm okay." I drove back into town. Stopped at the Tim's on 69 because I always stopped there. Got my double-double. Sat in a parking lot for a while with the windows down and the spring air coming in. I volunteer now, 2 mornings a week at the food bank on Elgin Street. Started in March. Raymond used to do something similar, years back, and I always meant to. I kept putting it off the way you put off the things that feel optional, the things that don't have a deadline. Turns out, when you lose enough, when enough of what you thought was real, turns out to be something else. The things that are genuinely real become very obvious, very fast. I don't know what the rest of this looks like. That's an honest answer, and I think at 64 you earn the right to give honest answers. I know I have my kids. I know I have this house in this town, and mornings when the coffee is good and the light comes through the kitchen window at an angle I've always liked. I know I had a friend for 60 years who spent the last year of his life quietly making sure I'd be protected after he was gone. What he did for me, the care it took, the patience, the precision. I don't have a word for that. I'm not sure there is one. What I know is that when I think about Raymond now, I don't only feel the loss. I feel something that sits alongside the loss. Something warm. That's enough. For now, that's enough. I've been thinking a lot lately about the choices people make when no one is watching. Not the big dramatic choices. The ones you make in a moment of crisis when everything is loud and urgent and you don't have time to think. I mean the quiet ones. The ones made slowly, over months and years in private. The ones that reveal who a person actually is underneath everything they show the world. Diane made her choices over at least 2 years. Small transfers. Careful timing. A separate name on a lease in Oakville. None of it was impulsive. It was deliberate, patient, constructed. And that's the part I keep coming back to. Not the betrayal itself, but the sustained effort it took. You don't do something like that by accident. You choose it again and again for hundreds of days in a row. And Raymond made his choices too, quietly in the last year of his life, when he had every reason to spend his remaining time only on himself. He could have told me and stepped back. He could have left it in a letter and hoped for the best. Instead, he hired an investigator. He called in favors from old colleagues. He built a case the way he used to build actuarial models, methodically, with every variable accounted for. He thought about what I would need not just to know the truth, but to be protected by it. He thought about timing. He thought about evidence. He thought about me sitting across from a lawyer someday and having everything I needed already in hand. That's what I mean when I think about character. It's not a single act. It's a pattern of acts accumulated over time that shows you what someone actually values. Raymond valued me. He valued fairness. He valued the truth being something you could stand on, not just something you felt. And because he acted on those values consistently, even when it cost him time and energy he didn't have to spare, I am sitting in this house that is fully mine, with a clear legal record, with my retirement intact, instead of being on the other side of a very different situation. I'm not a man who talks much about what I deserve or don't deserve. That kind of thinking hasn't served me well. But I do believe that how we treat other people, the care we put into it, the honesty, the willingness to show up even when it's inconvenient, tends to come back around in some form, not always, not on any schedule, not in any way you can predict or plan for, but often enough that I've stopped dismissing it as coincidence. What I've had to make peace with is that I spent 38 years building something with a person who was, in some essential way, building something else at the same time. That's a hard thing to sit with. There were nights this past winter when it felt like the floor had gone out from under everything I remembered. And I let myself feel that. I didn't try to rush past it or explain it away, but I also made a decision. And I think this is the part that matters, the part that's actually mine to own, that the story of my life isn't going to be defined by what she did. It's going to be defined by what I do with the years I have left. The food bank on Tuesday mornings, the back deck I'm finally getting fixed. The phone calls to my kids that are more honest now than they were before, because losing the pretense of a perfect life turned out to free up a lot of space for the real thing. Raymond used to say that the most important question you can ask yourself is not what happened to you, but what you're going to carry forward and what you're going to set down. He said it about grief, mostly, but it applies to all of it. I'm still working on what to carry and what to set down. At 64, I figure I've got time to keep sorting it out.